Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray both continue to exchange barbs several days after their epic clash over Hamas on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Joe Rogan is clearly not over the bust-up, mocking and impersonating Douglas Murray on his latest podcast.
Have you been there?
Right, that's a good point.
You haven't been?
By the way, how is he in all these wars? Can I just go to wars? By the way, how are you allowed to just go to wars? Is that the way
you should at least
can you just
have the
go to
courtesy of going there.
Can I just go to wars, or do I have to come back and say what people want me to say about the wars? Can I go to the wars and have my own opinions, or do I have to have the opinions?
Not if you want to go back.
That's right. It's very interesting, this war tourism. How do I get on this war tourism?
Yeah.
I'd like to go to the Ukraine.
Well,
I want to go. I want to go. I want to go to all this war tourism.
Online commentators had mixed feelings on Rogan's latest attack, with this person saying, "So let me get this straight. The comedian who doesn't visit the war zone to confirm whether what he's saying is true knows everything about the war, but a journalist who has been there doesn't know what he's talking about. Very bad look for Rogan. He's letting his friendships cloud his ability to think rationally about the arguments he's making." Meanwhile, this commentator defended Joe Rogan and Dave Smith, pointing out this is what comedians do. He said, "Murray was smug during the debate and ended up flanked out on a majority of the issues. This is an acceptable level of mockery from two professional comedians. Douglas has thick skin. Joe would welcome him on again. Tim would talk to him too. Both would give Douglas a fair shake." Joe Rogan's diss comes after Douglas Murray took a stab at the podcast host in his New York Post column, saying, "2 weeks ago, Rogan had his mate Dave Smith on yet again for a long podcast. But for my return to the show, the deal was that I could come on only if Dave Smith was once again in the studio, as if Joe didn't want to be unaccompanied, or that Joe thought that I, of all his guests, must be challenged. I like a debate as much as the next Scotsman, but what resulted was more than a debate. It seems to have led to some kind of podcast world meltdown." And Murray also found a surprising comrade in progressive comedian and talk show host Bill Maher after the ordeal.
Like us do, who recognize this as a big problem on the left, but also recognize the horrible stuff that's going on the right. I mean, you were on Joe Rogan a couple of days ago, a week ago, something like that. Got a lot of press, and I'm glad you said what you said, which is, I like Joe, but he has on people who entertain these crazy conspiracy theories and doesn't really push back on them. It's okay to have, I'm a free speech absolutist pretty much, but there seems to be no pushback on this.
Also surprising was perhaps Murray's biggest endorsement. Donald Trump made a post on Truth Social, congratulating and endorsing Douglas Murray's new book, despite also being friends with Joe Rogan. Guests on Piers Morgan's show also weighed in, slamming Dave Smith for debating on emotion rather than fact.
Yeah, Piers, two UFC fighters into a ring, and one punches the other in the nose, and Dave says, how dare he punches him in the nose in this fight? That's the analogy. He's not making an appeal to facts, how the law of war works, how war works, whether it's the theory underneath the war or the actual framework to understand it. He doesn't like theory like just war theory, things like that.
But despite Douglas Murray's overwhelming praise for standing up to Joe Rogan like no one else has dared to, the other opponent in the debate, Dave Smith, has come out and reiterated his position, doubling down on criticism of the author.
I left there with the feeling, I would say even a half hour in to the show, I think the reaction that we're getting, I've had a lot of debates where the reaction is overwhelmingly that I won the debate. In this particular case, it's just that he lost it. Like, it wasn't even that I beat him in the debate. He started out with a 40-minute struggle session for Joe Rogan that just contained probably the longest stretched logical fallacy I've ever seen anyone open a debate with. Just a naked appeal to authority, completely unclear with what he was saying. He came in, so in this struggle session with Joe Rogan, I couldn't make this up. This is barely before I presented any thought or argument or opinion. I think it was before that. He comes in with this long that is an appeal to authority, an appeal to expertise. You're having these non-experts talk about issues that experts should talk about. And I'm not saying they should be censored, and I'm not saying they shouldn't talk about it, but they're talking about it and they're acting like they're experts. How are they acting like they're experts? Because they're talking about it. And when they're talking about it, was just the most ridiculous argument, the most pompous, elitist, essentially telling the host of the show and the entire audience, your opinion doesn't matter. Like, it was just a strategy to me that was like, you want to make everyone think you're a pompous asshole? It was wild.
Douglas Murray spoke exclusively with Sky News host Rita Panahi about the fallout from the Joe Rogan podcast.
The counterpart who Joe Rogan brought in for that debate seemed to think that, for instance, not going to a place that you're talking about was in some way a desirable thing. Whereas I, as a journalist, you as a journalist know that if we cover a story in a country, for instance, when you were covering the American election in 2020, as I was, you were in America. Why were you in America? Because you were covering the American elections. And if you'd have been just sitting in Australia covering the American elections, that wouldn't have had the validity that it does if you are in the country you are writing about. I think this is a deliberate misunderstanding by people, and let me very quickly explain why. Joe Rogan is a big MMA guy. I probably know, or you probably know about as much about MMA as I do. You might surprise me, Rita, but if either of us went on his podcast and decided to spend the 3 hours talking about MMA, we would be found out pretty fast as not knowing what we were talking about. And at some point, Joe would cotton on to that. And he would say, I'm sorry, you seem not to know about this subject. Well, that's because it's a subject he knows a lot about. My simple point is that there is something very different happening if a host's platform repeatedly cranks with the same opinion as each other on very, very important questions.